Hello and very welcome to the August release of our Cloud News series. This is Alexander Wechsler from Wechsler Consulting, and I do hope you were able to go to vacation, or if that still was not the case, you have some weeks of vacation in front of you. Nevertheless, we have collected the Cloud News for you, so let's have a look at some of the things that happened, especially in Azure, in August. I want you to join me in our Azure Talk section, where I speak about some of the highlights of the past month. And then we go into our focus topic, which is the new Microsoft .NET MAUI framework, a user interface framework for .NET Core, or the new .NET 6 framework as it will be called. And we're going to have a more thorough look at that as well. The first topic I want to shed some light on is the new Azure SDK, which has been just released. And in the global SDK, especially the Identity SDK, has some new interesting features. And I do recommend, if you want to have some more information, just go to the blog post of the Azure Identity team. Some of the most striking new capabilities are gathered around the default Azure credential. So this functionality has gained quite some interesting new updates, especially for developers. They are good news because the Visual Studio Code, as well as the Azure CLI support has been significantly improved. Therefore, if you're working a lot in Azure, have a look at this. Another thing that I found really interesting are Windows CE app containers. Windows CE is dead, as we all know, so it really came surprising to me that the Microsoft Windows product group is offering so-called Windows CE app containers, which enables you to run Windows CE applications or Windows CE code on Windows 10 IoT Core systems. This sounds interesting, but I've thought about it and I've written a blog post laying out my thoughts on that. Basically, I do not think that it's a good idea to use Windows CE app containers to port your application onto a new operating system, and I laid out the reasons why in my blog post. So if you're interested in that, just have a look at the post and see if you can follow my line of argumentation there. There has also been a new and very interesting podcast on SignalR been released. If you're using or if you want to use SignalR for your real-time communication efforts, it certainly is valuable to have a look at this new Azure DevOps podcast, where Jeffrey Palermo lays out the newest developments around this quite interesting technology. Azure Data Explorer is introducing some really interesting data sharing features, which could develop into making Data Explorer a killer application for enterprises. Why? Well, in enterprises, you always have the problem how to get data to people which need to query the data and do reports on the data. As very good shown in this blog post, you have the data provider, which is a source of your data from IoT, from maybe business transactions or other data sources. And normally you always need to create new databases, write interfaces to enable data consumers working with this data. Azure Data Explorer makes this sharing of data easy because data providers are now able to invite data consumers, and they are able to work and query the real data, which means that there's no synchronization required between the data creation and the data consummation, which of course can be an absolute time benefit because you're working with real-time data. Another good thing is that the Azure Data Explorer separates data computation and data storage. This enables interesting scenarios such as the data provider has its own computation cluster and an Azure Blob Store, and with the help of a so-called symbolic link, the data provider is able to share the data with the data consumer, and the data consummation doesn't put load on the data provider cluster, which also may be under heavy load due to the data ingest. The data consumer has its own computation cluster, which takes over the query load, but works on the same real-time data as the data provider. And that's a real cool and groundbreaking thing. So have a look, and you can find the link to this page as always in the blog post. And now to a focus topic, a new framework, to be more specific, a new user interface framework called .NET MAUI. And if you have been a UI developer in the recent years, you know that UI development, especially if you're going to do that cross-platform, is a rough ride. Pretty much the same rough ride as you would do windsurfing in Maui in the big waves. Of course, the goal of a new user interface framework is not to provide you the same rough ride you've experienced in the last years. Therefore, .NET MAUI promises us a smooth sailing experience, pretty much as we can see it in this video. And hopefully, this is going to be true. Let's have a closer look at what .NET MAUI stands for. It is a multi-platform application UI for building native cross-platform apps. It's based on .NET Core, therefore it's cross-platform, and this will enable you to deploy your UI application to multiple devices across mobile and desktop systems. It's going to use a single project and a single code base, and that's a different approach than technologies such as Xamarin, for example. And especially talking about Xamarin, Xamarin is one of the parents in combination with .NET Core due to the fact that MAUI is an evolution of Xamarin Forms. As you might know, Xamarin Forms is supporting the MVVM application architecture, model view model. MAUI is supporting that application architecture as well, but it also offers support for some new architectures such as React UI, which is a very capable architecture that composes UIs out of a lot of different components, and another new architecture called Model View Update, which originates from the Elm language and also can be found in the newest F# implementations. A model in this architecture can be compared more to a state and therefore is different to the objects we call a model in the MVVM architecture. But this architecture also has some benefits, especially if you're looking at hot load scenarios. However, I would recommend to have a look at all of these different application architectures and choose one that makes most sense for your use case and solution architecture. MAUI, due to its descendant from Xamarin Forms, uses XAML, and actually it uses the XAML dialect propagated by Xamarin Forms. Global availability is planned for November 2021, together with the full .NET 6 package, which will be completely based on .NET Core. It's not classical .NET anymore in this package. So the unification and the renewal will be first implemented with .NET 6. Yeah, while this is still a year away, it gives us at least some time to test the new framework, MAUI, as well as the new .NET 6 framework in combination before we start new projects with that. There are also quite interesting talks about unifying MAUI and Blazor in the future, but these are still in discussion. However, if you look at the overall approach, you might think that you may have heard this before. And yes, I think it very much sounds like the old Java promise, write once, run everywhere, which hopefully with .NET MAUI and .NET 6 becomes reality. To be honest, the chances are much better than they were 20 years ago when Java started with that promise, because our technology stacks now are much more sophisticated as they were at that time. And we've learned a lot during the last 20 years that that's not as easy as a task as it used to look like. So maybe now is the time to deliver on that promise. So if you're a developer, .NET MAUI will be the next cool thing coming your way. Alright, what else happened at Wechsler Consulting? Well, we have our courses out and we have some new posts. I've already been talking about this Windows CE app container post, and that's also quite interesting information about selective disk backup for Azure VMs out there, which helps you to shrink the data you're backing up, because you're not backing up complete OS images, but just the folders and files you want to protect and back up in your system. That's it for this month's episode. I hope you find the information useful, and if there are any questions, please leave a message below. Thanks a lot and goodbye from Alexander Wechsler.